How do you suppose the world will end? Will it end in nuclear holocaust, terrorist attack, economic crash, or environmental collapse? Will the world be lost to dictatorships or oppressive regimes? Will it end in an epidemic, asteroid strike, or alien invasion? Or will it end with babies? Cute, adorable, little babies. The threat they pose to civilization is not only that there are too many of them, but too few.
But wait, isn't there a population explosion on planet Earth? That's what we've been told for decades. In the year 1900, there were 1 billion people on the planet. Now there are 7 billion people on the planet, and it just keeps growing. Clearly, our planet cannot support so many bodies. So how can I say that we have too few babies? I can say it because most of the babies today are being born in all the wrong places. If you look at countries of the developing world, the poor countries, especially in Africa, there the population explosion is still going strong. They're producing far too many babies than their resources can support. But if you look at the developed world, countries like in North America and Europe and industrial Asia, you see the opposite. They are not producing enough babies to refresh their population. They are facing a population implosion. So on planet Earth, we have 2 separate planets with 2 separate problems. We have overpopulation in the third world and underpopulation in the first world. And this underpopulation is kind of snuck up on us secretly because we tend to look just at the planet as a whole. And on the planet as a whole, we still have a growing population and unsustainable growth. But if you look just at the organized, the rich and organized countries of the world, you have a dire problem that they are not refreshing their populations. They're not producing enough babies to sustain their populations. And you may ask, well, why don't I see this around me? You look at all the countries of North America and Europe and Asia, and most of them are continuing to grow. Their population hasn't taken a dive yet. And that's because there's a delay, something called demographic momentum. When the birth rate falls, the population is not going to fall until 60 or 70 years later. That's because all the adults who are alive who come from the high birth rate period are going to stay alive until the end of their natural lifespans. Then when they die, we're going to see this dramatic drop-off in population. For example, in the United States, we had something called the baby boom, the post-war baby boom. Between 1946 and 1964, America produced a huge number of babies. America was a baby factory, and at its peak, the average woman was producing about 4 children in her lifetime until the 1960s. And something magical happened in the 1960s. We invented reliable birth control, the pill. Suddenly people had a choice about whether to have babies. And largely they chose not to have babies. This dramatically transformed society. But the bottom line is, starting in the 1960s, the birth rate in most of the developed world dropped to less than 2 babies per woman. In other words, you need a little more than 2 babies per woman to sustain the population. And as of the 1960s, it dropped to less than that. However, the population continued to grow because we have all of those babies that were born during the baby boom who are still alive. And any population, even 1 baby per woman, is going to just add to that population. You don't see the dramatic fall in population until the original adults from the baby boom die. which is going to happen just about now. So over almost 20 years, we had a huge explosion in babies, and over the next 20 years starting now, we're going to have a huge explosion in deaths as those babies die. And that's when we're going to see the dramatic fall in population, even in the United States. So I'm not the first to sound the alarm about the world's underpopulation problem. I know that academics have been worried about this for years. Many of my ideas come from a book called What to Expect When No One is Expecting by Jonathan Last. But I don't want to stop there. What I want to present here is my own repackaging of the world's population problems. And I call this package the baby bomb, where we're concerned not just about underpopulation, but also about the persistent overpopulation in the third world and three other elements, demographic elements that are dragging countries down. So my baby bomb, my contribution to the field is this baby bomb. You can Google for it. I don't think you're going to find it because I just invented it. And as the inventor of the baby bomb, I get to define what it is. The baby bomb has 5 moving parts. I call them explosion, implosion, dilution, depletion, and leakage. So we know what explosion is. That's the rapid growth in population in the third world. It's still a problem. It can't be ignored. Implosion, of course, is the loss of population in the developed world, and that can't be ignored either, and that also has devastating effects. The new element that I'm introducing now is dilution. And that's a kind of a touchy subject because that's a polite way of saying that all the wrong people, even within a country, all the wrong people are having most of the babies. So it's not the most accomplished, the most successful, the most intelligent who are having the most babies, but the other people, the less accomplished, the less intelligent, the less disciplined people who are having the most babies. And that certainly has a long-term effect. It has to have a long-term effect because we are a product of evolution. We are a product of Darwinism. And if we continue to produce too many babies from the wrong people, well, their values are going to take over society, and the values of the more intelligent people are going to be lost. It's sort of a reverse Darwinism. It's what's happening in almost every country is the survival of the unfittest, where the least qualified parents are the parents that have the most babies. So the fourth element of the baby bomb is something I call depletion. You might call it immigration. So certain countries of the world, like the United States, are always seeking talent from the rest of the world. We'll take in doctors and engineers and other skilled workers who we need. What is kind of invisible, however, is that you're stealing that talent from some other country. You're depleting the talent resources of some other country when you take, for example, a doctor. You take a doctor out of Nigeria, and he does much better in the United States or in Germany, but Nigeria has lost one doctor. So this affects a lot of countries who are on the giving end of that immigration equation. And finally, we have what I call leakage. That is people coming into your country that you have very little control over. Leakage consists of illegal aliens coming to your country to work, and it consists of refugees fleeing some war-torn area. And we know, for example, that Germany has suffered from a huge influx of refugees. Most of them are peaceful. Some cause trouble. Some turn out to be terrorists. But this is having a huge impact on the demographic profile of a receiving country like Germany. So those are the 5 elements, the 5 working parts of my baby bomb. And together, not every country is affected the same way, But one of those processes, at least, is at work in every single country in the world. And they tend to gang up on a country. So you've got a combination of these factors ganging up on a country, and in the end causing devastating effects. So now that we know what the baby bomb is, we can talk about these individual elements and how they're working together to destroy the world. So if you have an excess of babies in the third world and a deficit of babies in the first world, why can't we just transport all the extra babies from the third world to the first world? Unfortunately, it's not that easy. What the first world is lacking is not really babies. You can produce babies on demand. We don't have a baby shortage. What we have is a parent shortage, meaning the lack of adults willing to spend we have a lack of adults willing to spend the 20 years necessary to raise a child and assimilate them into your culture, into your way of thinking. So if you want a baby, if you're prepared to make that investment, you can find a baby at home. You don't have to go to Somalia to find a baby. The only way that the third world can contribute to the population issues of the first world is they can send adults. We can bring adults from the third world into the first world, and there's a lot of problems with that. There are adults from the third world that you want to have in your country. You want to have skilled professionals like doctors and engineers, and we're already doing that. We're already draining the third world of all its talent. But to meet our population needs, we need more people, and that means bringing in the uneducated, bringing in average Nigerians and average Somalians, and that's just not going to work. Let's just imagine that France opened the floodgates and they let anyone from Nigeria come to France. Well, first of all of Nigeria would come to France, and it would overwhelm French. It would overwhelm the country. But even if you place a quota on how many come in, those average Nigerians and average Somalians aren't going to know what to do in France. All the Nigerians who come to France, uneducated Nigerians who come to France, they're just going to cluster together with other Nigerians. They're going to form enclaves of Nigeria within France, as has truly happened in France. In the suburbs of Paris, there are enclaves of people from other countries, and what you're doing is bringing all the problems of Nigeria and transferring them to France. So you've got all these little Nigerians growing within France, and if their birth rate is the same as it is back in Nigeria, then they're growing, and what happens is France turns into Nigeria. You haven't preserved France. You've just overwhelmed France with Nigeria. So the real issue isn't bringing bodies into your country to solve your underpopulation problem. You have to assimilate those bodies into your culture, and that's the difficult part. It's time consuming, it's expensive to do this, and with adults who were raised in poverty in another country, it may not even be possible. So in essence, there is no solution that the third world can give the first world to their population problems. You still have these separate planets, and these planets are damaging each other. They're not helping each other. For example, the first world is taking all the talent, is sucking all the talent out of the third world and making it harder for the third world to solve its problems because of the talent drain. At the same time, the third world, with its population explosion, is feeding refugees and terrorists and other undesirable elements back into the first world. Not to mention all the endless humanitarian crises in these countries, which, if nothing else, hurt our conscience. So you can't look to the third world for help in solving the first world's problems. The first world has to solve it on its own, and it's extraordinarily difficult. The problem is, how do you convince people to have babies? Now that you've given them the right to have control over their own procreation, you can't easily take it away. And as long as people have that right, they're going to use it, and they're going to use it sensibly for their own well-being. And who wants to have 6 kids? Who wants to have 4 kids? It's hard to convince people even to have 2 kids. Look at me. I'm the living example of this. Here I am talking to you about how we're facing a population crisis. We need more babies. But I'm not willing to do it. Aside from the problem of not having a womb to incubate them in, I just can't afford it. I can't. It's said that a child costs $1 million to raise in the United States, and I don't have that kind of money. There's so many different ways, there's so many different good reasons to not have children, and people are taking advantage of it for good reasons of their own. I approve of reproductive choice, and I approve of the choices that technology has given us, but at the same time, it's just destroying us. So evolution has equipped us with various mechanisms to assure that we reproduce, because evolution is really concerned about that. We wouldn't be here if we didn't have certain behavioral traits embedded in our brains, and these traits are still with us despite all our civilization and our technology. Each of us still has these impulses buried within us, and I can identify at least 3 of them. One of them is the sex drive, or the desire of men and women to come together. And this is a very powerful force, even today. And presumably at the end of that, you have the pitter-patter of little feet, which is the traditional result of any romantic entanglement. Secondly, you have long-term bonding. Men and women aren't just drawn together, they bond with each other in a very powerful bond like between a mother and a child. And this is necessary because it takes so damn long and takes so much commitment to raise a human child for a minimum of 15 years or so. Thirdly, we have this fondness for little creatures. Now, I think almost everyone will look at a baby and want to interact with that baby, talk to that baby, and anything that's little and small and cute like that is a draw to us. So you have these 3 mechanisms. They stood us well for most of human history, but we found ways to subvert them with our modern technology. And of course, we've subverted sex by inventing contraception, which I approve of, but still the fact is, sex has now become a recreation rather than a pathway to parenthood. And people enjoy it as a recreation, like they enjoy a fine wine or something else like that, some other form of entertainment. So we've divorced sex from procreation. So we now just have sex. So there goes that drive out the window. We also, now that we have contraception, people can bond for life. People can have romantic attractions without the children coming out of it. In fact, a relationship is much better between a man and a woman if there's no children interfering in it. So we've managed to subvert that one. So how have we subverted the 3rd mechanism, this fondness for little creatures? Well, we invented something called pets. And pets are these little creatures that we take care of as though they were our children. And we managed to exercise all these impulses to take care of little things by taking care of pets. The only trouble with pets is, well, they live for 10 or 15 years, and then they die, and they have contributed nothing to society. We've expended all our effort on taking care of them, and they haven't contributed to our bloodline or anything like that. They just die. So we've managed to take all of these ironclad things that nature gave us to assure our reproduction and subvert them. And now we only have children if we want to have them, if it's convenient for us, if we can afford to have them, if it fits into our schedule. Unfortunately, this isn't enough babies, because for every parent that's having 2 babies, there's another potential parent who isn't having any, and we're just not keeping up. And no one is more torn by this than I am, because uh, I thought most of my life that I was doing my duty for the planet by not having children. And I figured, well, there's already too many children on the planet, so my responsibility to the environment, to my civilization, is to not have any children at all. And I gave money to Planned Parenthood because I figured, well, that's the only truly valid charity, one that's guaranteed to have good results. And it probably is in the third world, but not in the first world. So I'm torn as much as anyone. I have these liberal values. I believe in sexual freedom. I believe in personal liberty and in the ability to choose whether to have a child. At the same time, I recognize how it's damaging our society and could drive everything that I care about into the ground. So what's wrong with a falling population? It just means more space for you and me, right? We'll just scale everything down. As the population drops, we'll just scale everything down and everything will be okay, right? Wrong. Population loss means a lot of bad things happening, chiefly based on economics, that our economic models that we've built the world on over the past 50 years don't work anymore. Economics are going to collapse in all of these countries that are losing population. And it's kind of hard to make people understand this because it's easy to understand how overpopulation leads to bad things because you're cramming more and more people into a small space. And yes, things are going to go bad. But it's hard to understand how underpopulation can also be devastating. And there's more ways that I could possibly describe how underpopulation is bad, but let me just give you one example. Pension systems are going to start failing. In other words, care for the old, whether it be government-run pension systems like Medicare and Social Security in the United States, or private pension systems, because many of these pension systems depend on younger workers to fund them. In other words, in the United States, there's no Social Security trust fund, although there in theory is supposed to be. The people who pay for the Social Security benefits for older people are the younger people. And if the number of older workers, retiring workers, swells and the number of younger workers shrinks, then there's no way these younger workers can fund these benefits for these older workers. So these pension systems are going to fail. Either they will fail gradually by cutting Social Security benefits, or they will fail catastrophically simply by going bankrupt. And when that happens, a lot of old people, which are an ever-growing segment of the population, are going to be left high and dry. And they're going to be very unhappy. And this leads to political dysfunction. This leads to the older people going out and voting out a moderate government and voting in a radical government that promises to solve all their problems. Do you wonder why Donald Trump won the presidential election, or why Brexit won in Britain, or why totalitarian and authoritarian regimes seem to be on the rise all over the world? A lot of this is tied to demographics, how things have changed, how the proportions in society have changed between young and old, and who elected Donald Trump and who voted for Brexit. That is the older workers of these countries who feel that the promises the government has made to them have not been fulfilled. That's going to keep happening, and that's going to get worse. And the risk to our society is that we lose our ability to govern ourselves because we've elected so many radical regimes with idealistic promises that can't possibly be fulfilled. We run the risk of losing our liberties and losing everything that makes our cultures great. If we cannot sustain our population, then our culture is going to vanish. If the population of Japan drops by 50% in the next century, which it's threatening to do, then essentially Japan is lost. Japan is going away. Japan is becoming a ghost town. And we have these mechanisms going on all over the world. I'm not saying every country is the same. Every country has a different set of problems. But nearly every country in the world is facing a grave demographic crisis. Either it's a country in Africa that can't control its population, or it's a country in Eastern Europe that can't sustain its population. All of these countries are failing. They are going under. And if things look a little bit better in the United States and in Canada and in Northern Europe, that's only because we're able to attract immigrants from other parts of the world. So we're sucking up the talent of all the rest of the world to try to sustain our own populations. But ultimately, this can't work. Ultimately, when the baby boomers start dying, no amount of immigration is going to keep our population up. And in these countries that can't attract immigration, their economies are collapsing. Greece is collapsing. Spain and Italy are collapsing, in a large part because they can't sustain their populations. Population loss is the beginning, could be the beginning of the end, could be the beginning of a great dark age for our society. And I'm here just to warn you about it. I'm not offering any solutions. Frankly, I don't have any solutions. My only goal in this video is to define the problem and make you understand what it is and make you understand how we are all sinking. It's like the world is composed of a bunch of Titanics that have all struck an iceberg and they're all slowly going down. They're going down in different ways and in different rates, but they're all going down. And instead of it, the Titanic itself sunk in about 2.5 hours. I'm talking about countries that are sinking over the course of decades, over the course of 50 years or more. And the first 50 years is already up because it's been 50 years since birth control has been around. And now we're seeing that, yes, the ships are sinking. So now that I've invented the baby bomb, I have a lot of things to say about it. But this is probably a good stopping point for now. Eventually I'm going to come up with another video on this topic. When I do, it will be linked to the end of this video and to the comments down below. And you can subscribe to my channel to be informed of all of my new videos. I sense that I still have my work cut out for me to convince you that these problems are real and substantial, and that the baby bomb could be the most serious threat that mankind has ever faced, even more serious than war or global warming or political turmoil or all the other problems that we face, because demography, the demographics of human populations kind of underlie all of those problems, and they affect our ability to respond to all of those problems. And I urge you to use the comments down below to challenge me, ask me questions, and point out something that I may have overlooked, because I would love for this not to be true. I would love to say that mankind is going to be okay. But I can't say it right now. I can't offer any solutions. We can talk about solutions, but I don't see how mankind is going to respond to this particular crisis. You can force people to not have children, but how do you force people to have children? That's the real challenging part, and you can't just threaten people to do it. You have to create a whole environment that is conducive to having children, and most of the countries in the world, we just don't have that.